The Charles Adler Show starts now.
So before we do anything else, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, the bottom of my soul, if there is such a thing. Just really appreciate the reaction that we've been getting from people deciding to subscribe to the podcast. I could give you a whole bunch of the metrics, but that's not what I want to do on a podcast. Suffice it to say, we're just leading the pack in a whole bunch of categories, and I'm just blown away because we've been only at this for like 9 days. So it's just beautiful, and we couldn't be doing this without you. So thank you so much for the support. Thank you for subscribing. Tell your friends, your neighbors, your family, anybody, your suppliers, anyone in your life who might be interested in hearing some what we hope is intelligent, animated talk about a lot of stuff that's going on in this country and around the world. Just subscribe to the Charles Adler podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, we've got a fellow podcaster coming on, not just a fellow podcaster, but a Substacker. If you don't know what Substack is, we're about to tell you. But he is someone who is based in Ottawa, but doesn't speak Ottawa. And you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when we bring him on. Evan Scrimshaw, thank you so much. Welcome to the Charles Adler podcast.
Thanks for having me. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, so this is quite the honor for me.
Well, I appreciate it. Now, you tell me what I'm talking about when I say Evan may be based in Ottawa, but he doesn't really speak Ottawa. What does that mean to you?
So I am a massive nerd, and when I was a high schooler, I would literally skip school to go watch the House of Commons and occasionally the Supreme Court of Canada. And so I understand Ottawa, and I can speak official Ottawa. But the problem is when you can speak official Ottawa, and when you went to school at Ottawa, and when you worked on the Hill for a year, you forget that like normal people don't understand. And so a lot of the coverage of Canadian politics speaks a language that people do not understand. And so as I've launched my Substack, the goal has always been to write and to talk about Canadian politics in a way that I would have this conversation with friends over a drink, over a beer, and to speak sort of not just truth to power, but speak truth in a way that people will connect with. And the greatest compliment people pay me is they would recognize a Scrimshaw article even if they didn't see the byline, because my writing style is such that you know when you're reading it, because you know that there are not a lot of people who are speaking the same, that may be saying the same words, they're not speaking the same language as me.
So I want to read from your latest Substack, just because explanation is wonderful, but there's nothing like illustration. So let me illustrate what our guest, our friend Evan Scrimshaw, is saying. This is from his latest Substack, and I realize some people don't know what a Substack is. We'll talk about that in a moment. But here's how he writes, and I think everyone listening to this will know that this is not typical Ottawa. This is not when you're watching those news shows coming out of Ottawa. This is not how the host or the guests speak. So Evan Scrimshaw in his latest podcast, "I'd be crazy not to follow where you lead." That's a quote. Why has Pierre Poilievre never said on camera that he supports gay marriage? Never said it on camera in English. I could be wrong, writes Scrimshaw, but Poilievre voted against gay marriage in 2005. And the only source I've ever found where he said that vote was wrong was in French. A 2020 La Presse article. La Presse is the number one English language broadsheet in Montreal, although it's not much of a broadsheet anymore. It's only online, but they're doing very well. Anyway, La Presse is very influential in Quebec, and Scrimshaw writes that Pierre Poilievre, in the La Presse article, Pierre Poilievre calls gay marriage a great success, says it in French. When he was thinking about running for the Tory leadership, and he thought his lane was to Andrew Scheer's left. Now, this is the leadership contest Poilievre chose not to run in, but when he was thinking about running in the one that Scheer won, now that he has been moving to the right, he has refused, as far as I can tell, to give the denial he gave to La Presse in English and on camera. We could go further, but I think the point is everyone understands that the reason it's very, very easy for me to lift this off the screen is because Evan speaks the way I speak. Evan speaks the way conversationalists speak. It's like, having a beer with someone, or you're at a restaurant. And what we always try to do with all of these shows is we try to, as much as possible, give you the conversation that's taking place in the booth. You're in one or two booths over, and you're craning your neck to hear what the two people on the podcast are saying. At least that's the effect that I try to have. It was exactly the same radio. We want to speak conversationally. We don't want to speak Ottawa. Evan, let's get into what you said in the Substack. Why is it important that Pierre Poilievre doesn't say in English what he says in French? So that's just a general question. Why is it important that he's espousing different principles in the two languages? And then specifically, we can get into the business of same-sex marriage. But why is it a problem, do you think, that he says one thing in French and another thing in English?
It's a problem when you're refusing to say the same thing in both languages, because it shows that you do not actually care about issues as a matter of principle. You only care about them as a matter of expediency. We saw this back in the day with Tom Mulcair in 2015, when he refused to say that he would let Quebec separatists break up the country with 50% plus one of the vote, ignoring the Clarity Act and the secession reference, because Mulcair refused to say it in English because he knew that that would be a deeply unpopular position amongst Anglo left-wingers. But he knew he had to say that in French, otherwise the voters who had voted for Doucette for all those years, but then voted for Jack, would leave. And the problem for Poilievre is the base of voters he's trying to appeal to is very disconnected, right? He's trying to break through in Quebec, a place that is more socially liberal, certainly about certain issues, abortion and gay marriage, than the rest of than specifically the West. But he also is trying to avoid a problem on his Max Bernier PPC right. And so he's trying to sort of maintain the strategic ambiguity where he winks and nods to the fact that, no, I'm not a crazy person. Like, if you live in Mississauga or you live in Trois-Rivières, yeah, you can vote conservative. Don't worry, I'm not crazy. But in Portage or in, insert random, Fort Mac or whatever, no, don't worry. I'm not some like woke central Canadian elite. No, I'm one of you. But the problem is, strategic ambiguity might make sense, but it doesn't work, because at some point Google Translate exists and people can find what he said in French, which was the thing that undid Mulcair in 2015, was Trudeau said. So, okay, do you want to repeat what you said in English, what you said in French and English? And at some point, Poilievre will be tripped up by it. We just don't know when.
It doesn't make sense to me. On the one hand, the Poilievre crew counts so much on digital media. It is the god that they worship. On the other hand, they ought to know that people in Mississauga and Trois-Rivières can access digital media and can find out in a heartbeat that they're talking about somebody who's speaking from, both sides of his mouth. And that is exactly what most people really, really resent about politicians. But going beyond that, if he's trying to portray himself as a person of the people, of the common people, that's just not something that common people appreciate. Some of the people who are, let's just call them members of the chattering classes, not the common people, they sort of fluff that off as, well, that's all politicians do that. But just regular salt-of-the-earth people feel that they're getting snake oil when someone is speaking out of both sides of their mouth, different principles in different languages. Let's focus, if we can, on T-shirt week for Pierre Poilievre and Danielle Smith at the Calgary Stampede. Talk to me a little bit about what you focused on in your Substack, because I thought your take was not just incisive as it always is, but it gets this conversation to a much more important level. I think most people in the country, in my opinion, have trivialized the issue. Tell us why it matters.
So I don't really care about the shirt itself, right? I don't really, whatever, he took a photo. I've seen politicians in rope lines or in these situations before in person. Like, you're just kind of standing there, people are being ushered your way. You just got to, you pause, you shake the hand, whatever, you move on. I've seen Trudeau do it at various liberal events over the years. He just stands there for an hour and a half. He's robotic and he just smiles and move on. That I don't really care about. What I care about is the fact that there's a reason why this guy thinks that Pierre Poilievre is the leader he should be following, right? There's a reason why somebody who has such an offensive and like insane belief, right? That straight pride is the thing we need to be paying attention to, that, you should thank a straight person for your existence. Like, it's nonsense. And there's a reason why Poilievre wants that person to want him, right? There's a reason why the Conservatives dropped a leaflet in the recent Portugal by-election whose message was that they included a photo of Max Bernier marching in Pride and part of the LGBT Tory stuff, because for a segment of the right base that the PBC are threatening, active homophobia is politically winning again. And a lot of the discourse is like, is Pierre Poilievre homophobic? I don't like, that's not interesting to me. I don't care what's in his heart. I care about the fact that Poilievre is playing an intentional political strategy, which is to wink and a nod to his right flank that, no, I'm with you. I'm not one of those people. I'm not soft. I'm not weak. I'm not woke. But, to La Presse, it's I oppose gay marriage, and he'll say it in French, but he won't say it in English. It's this strategic ambiguity that he's trying to do. But the problem is that it's horrifically offensive. This idea that if you actually believe in gay rights as a principle, that you won't say it because you are worried about the political retribution. But to the point you made about, digital media exists, that flyer that 20 years ago no one outside of Portage would have ever seen, right? Well, that's probably going to be in a liberal TV ad, whatever the next election is. The T-shirt's going to be in a liberal ad at some point, right? And that's the problem Poilievre is going to have, is that it used to be that you could play different media differently, right? You could go to a local newspaper and get a quote that was very different even in Edmonton versus Calgary. You could say different things and it could play because you wouldn't know that he was saying two things in two different places. Now we do, because the internet exists. And the problem for Poilievre is he's trying to wink and a nod to everybody, but everyone else sees both those things. And hypocrisy, lying, and distrust are the reasons that conservatives don't get elected in this country. Stephen Harper lost the 2004 election because of backbench MP and Ralph Klein said stupid things. And people were like, actually, do I trust this political party? I'm not so sure about that. And if the, sort of questions about trust are coming not from Cheryl Gallant, but are actually coming from the leader himself, that's not going to end well for the Conservatives.
So, Evan, there are people in all movements, but we're focused right now on the Conservative movement, because if the Liberals lose the next election, they're not going to be losing it to the NDP. They're not going to be losing it to Max Bernier. They're going to be losing it to Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, and that's why we're focused on that. There are people in the Conservative movement who honestly don't understand, and I know because I was in the movement for many years, they honestly do not understand that when you attack a minority, in this case LGBT, many other minorities feel they're being attacked, because many members of minority groups know that people who hate one minority hate all minorities. Why is that so difficult for the strategists in the Conservative Party to figure out? To me, this has been drop dead obvious for many, many years. There's nothing new about that.
Because people who are in the majority do not understand what it is like to be a member of a minority, right? I'm a gay man, so I understand this sort of like when you hear, especially racialized Canadians, but even more so racialized Americans, sort of talk about like their interactions with police, like it's really difficult to hear, but it's also like I kind of get it, because I understand the concept that I am not sort of inherently at ease in a place or in a situation in a way that my straight male friends are. And there is a sort of sense memory of not of sort of having that doubt that you extend the benefit of to other minorities, right? Which is why some of the most socially progressive places in this country are, Brampton and Mississauga, which are, if not majority non-white, pretty damn close to majority non-white, because racialized Canadians look at, gay rights and say, we understand what it's like to not have those protections and not have that equality, so we don't want that to happen to somebody else. And the reason the conservatives can't do it is they're in a bubble, because the sort of like hardline conservatives are in a bubble where they have convinced themselves that they are more plentiful than they are, right? Now the like chattering class conservatives, like the ones who are telling us that Josh Ray was going to be the next leader, they're also in a bubble. But the right, and certainly the like Jenny Byrne right that is currently running Conservative Party, they're in a bubble that thinks that their movement has essentially just been held back by bad tactics, right? That's why Jenny Byrne went on David Hurley's podcast for all of 2021 and acted like Aaron O'Toole should be winning this election. And, he's essentially just bad strategy away from 21st Sussex. We need a official residence so we have a shorthand for like, being in office. But like the problem is that that there are not as many movement conservatives as movement conservatives think, because the only people they interact with are fellow movement conservatives.
Okay, so they're drinking their own bathwater.
Right, of course.
So, Evan, help me out with this. I thought for the last number of years, and even this business of Pierre Poilievre and the taking the glasses off and the putting the makeup and whatever, softening himself. I have thought that the Conservatives have started to take seriously the gender gap, that Trudeau is well ahead of them, the Liberals are well ahead of them with women. We know that the women vote. We know there are more women than men in the country, more women voters than male voters, because women outlive men. None of this is difficult. We've known about this for a long time. Do we not know that if there's any group of people that is more offended by LGBT than specific LGBT people, it's their moms, it's their sisters, it's their female colleagues? The easiest way to tick off women is to discriminate against and hate on LGBT. Is that also something that's new to Jenny or anyone else who's strategizing for the Conservative Party of Canada?
I mean, it shouldn't be. And the other thing, of course, is that almost every like anti-gay rights, LGBT politician in Canada, they're also pro-life. So those people being back in the news is just bad news for your chance of winning women, because they're also going to be inherently distrustful and think that you're coming for women's right to choose. The problem that Canadian Conservatives are running into is a similar thing to what Republicans run into sometimes with Black voters, which is they get a very like fifth grade like assessment of what it takes to win them, right? Like there's this school of thought every 2 years that like, oh, the way Republicans get, like breakthrough with Black voters is, oh, they just got to like run Herschel Walker and he'll get 25% of the Black vote. Well, no, it's not. And it's a very racist white Republican idea that, oh, you just have to run the Black football player to win Black voters. Like, no, they're smarter than this. And conservatives do a similar version of it in Canada, right? Which is, oh, we'll put Stephen Harper in a sweater vest. We'll take the glasses off Skippy. We'll start putting him in like tight fitting t-shirts. And it's like, that's not the reason Pierre Poilievre has a problem with female voters. It's that his party is like culturally right wing. He doesn't do anything to slap down the socially conservative wing of his party, right? Leslie Lewis meets with a German Nazi and nothing happens to her, right? That's the issue set that's the problem for Poilievre, right? That's why he has issues. It's not because he's not good looking enough, or it's not because he wears glasses. It's because they have a policy set, because they can't say anything good about childcare, which is the other thing, right? They finally voted for something for some part of the deal, but Poilievre can't go on camera and say, "Oh yeah, I think that the childcare deals Trudeau signed are great," which disproportionately help women get back into the workforce and disproportionately make it make sense for women to go to work. That's the issue, but they're just playing a stupid version of this where it's like, oh no, if we just make him, if we just take the glasses off and soften him, our women problem will go away. No, it won't. You have to fix your policies, but they don't want to fix the policies, so they try a stupid end around that won't work.
So, Evan, I want to get away from the T-shirt thing for just a few moments and ask about the money. There are people who think that because all of this culture war stuff they're doing, whether it's the T-shirt or anything else, all of it is getting them a lot of clicks, certainly in social media. And many people feel it also translates into money. You're in Ottawa, you're in the belly of the beast. How successful are the Poilievre Conservatives at raising money right now? And how much of the money they're raising has to do with these so-called culture war issues?
It's definitely an effective fundraising ticket. I think they raise they outraised the Liberals by I think four something million in the first quarter. But the thing in Canada is there is a diminishing return on that money, especially assuming you're not just burning through all of it in between parliaments, because you can only spend. There's a spending limit based on the number of candidates you run. Like you can't. At some point you literally just raising the money. It doesn't matter. And the other thing is that mostly in Canada, money impacts haven't really ever shown themselves to be a big deal. Like a lot of people said, oh, Harper calling the 11-week campaign was going to win him the 2015 election because the Conservatives would have so much more money than the Liberals and the NDP. And it's like, no, when the Liberals started polling better, their donors came around, they were able to fully fund that campaign and they were able to win that campaign fairly handily. So it's working for what they want it to, but I don't think that means it's gonna work in terms of actually having an impact on the next election.
I want to talk about some other policy issues and specifically what Stephen Harper did recently in Hungary. I was a little surprised that it got as little media attention as it did, even though for us on the social media, it got a hell of a lot of attention. I want to get to that. But before we do that, I want to get to the idea of the Substack, which is a very, very important piece of the Evan Scrimshaw brand. I'm convinced that many people still don't know what it is. All of the chattering classes know it, of course, the people who participate. But I just wonder, without doing an infomercial for Substack, if you can tell me what it is, but more important to me, why is it so important to you as a communicator? First of all, what is Substack?
So Substack is essentially just a better version of a newsletter distribution system because it has all the benefits of a newsletter. You can put your email in, you'll have it delivered to your inbox in the same way that Politico can get delivered or whatever else. But it also gives individual writers a web landing page, which can serve as the archive of the site. So it's got the advantages of a newsletter. It also has the archive there. And it's good for me because it sort of means that I can focus on writing. I don't have to focus on maintaining a domain or making sure that my website's working. I can just write. And for me, it's the most valuable way to get what I want to get across out. allows people to meet me at the level that they want to, which is if people want it delivered to their inbox, they can get it. If they, just want to check in when they see a link on Twitter, or they just want to come, once a week or once every couple of weeks and just kind of catch up on what I've been writing, the web page is good. And also, frankly, not that it matters to any reader, it's really easy to use. So I've always just been a fan of it for that reason. It's simplicity, and that's key for people who don't want to have it like a full tech basis for this, and who just want to focus on writing. It works well, and it has sort of the dual functionality of a newsletter and a just sort of traditional website.
Is there a personal connection that's established between the reader and the person publishing the Substack? And is there a personal relationship there that involves a financial transaction? Is there a situation where with certain people on Substack, the reader is actually giving the Substacker a few bucks a month?
So you can have paid subscriptions. I don't, just because I don't need to. Plainly, like I have I have an actual job, and I write for an American sports betting site, so I have plenty of money hanging around. I don't need to do it, but for a lot of independent creators, it is super valuable that you can just get paid through the app or through them, and it's valuable for that. I just don't feel the need to charge people. As I joke to people sometimes, like, if you really want to pay me for my writing, you're free to DM me for my email credentials. But I like writing, and the thing for me is I have all these thoughts in my head, and I need to get them out somehow. So I can either bore all the people in my life with my takes, or I can write about it, and somehow there's an audience for my work. So I'd rather write about it.
So since you're participating in the sports betting industry in the States specifically, give me your sense of whether or not the Montreal Expos, you're wearing their cap. We've got to disclose that that's very close to my heart, because there were some years where I skipped a lot of classes in high school because I was at the old Jerry Park where the Montreal Expos began. And it was something that became a real passion for me. Even when I was in class, I'd have a transistor radio with me, and I'd have the buds in my ear, and I'd be listening to every single game. I do believe that for 3 years, I did listen to just about 400 Montreal Expos games. So I was beyond just a fan. I was a fanatic for the Expos. So that cap, I had several versions of that cap, and they were very near and dear to my heart. For people who are listening to the podcast, they don't know what I'm talking about. My apologies. Evan Scrimshaw is wearing a Montreal Expos cap. So finally, let's get to the question. What are the chances, Mr. Person working for an American sports betting site, what are the chances that the Expos come back to Montreal in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think very high, just because we've seen the NHL expand finally to 32 teams. And I think that there's sort of like imminent rumors that the NBA is going to do the same. And if you go to 32 teams, then it becomes like 8 divisions of 4 make the most sense. And if you expand both, Vegas probably becomes the other team, because everyone wants a sports team. Or no, there's plenty of options for the 32nd team. But a division of the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, and the Expos, that solves all of the problems that baseball had in the 90s and 2000s. There's a lot more sort of big money in Montreal that would be predisposed to wanting to own the Expos. And the third thing is, and this is, I think, the bigger thing, is a lot of people have seen what happened when baseball left, and Montreal is thriving at this point and is in a much better place now to accept. Is in a much better place now to accept it, as opposed to when the city and the province was, focused on much different things, and there was, like, the 90s and 2000s were not a particularly good time to be in Quebec. Now the constitutional wars have been settled, the team will do well. And just like, I'm sorry, baseball is not going to be able to sustain a situation where like where the Rays get 12,000 people or whatever, and Montreal, which would easily get 35,000 a game, just sits here empty. There's no way. It'll come.
So with Vegas, it's the A's, the Oakland A's that'll move to Vegas. Do you suspect a team that's not doing well will move to Montreal, or are you talking about a brand new franchise, Evan?
I think expansion. I think all four of the major sports leagues are going to 32 teams at this point, because the NHL had gone there, football is already there, and the rumors out of the NBA are that Vegas and Seattle are getting teams in the next like 5 years. So if baseball then becomes the only team at 30, I think they go to 32, and Montreal is very obvious to be one of those two teams.
All right, let me get to the Harper piece. First of all, and I realize, I'll stipulate, yes, I'm born in Hungary, so maybe this issue is a little near and dear to my heart. But the idea of Harper standing beside an authoritarian, which is still a euphemism for a dictator. He's not technically a dictator because he's won in democratic elections, not once, not twice, but more than twice. He's very popular in Hungary, and I'll stipulate that. Viktor Orban is who I'm talking about. He's the one who rewrote the constitution a number of years ago in Hungary, banning same-sex marriage. He's the one who has stigmatized Muslims. He's stigmatized virtually everyone in media, and now media in Hungary is very similar to media in Russia. Basically, media that is absolutely faithful to Orban, or else media people are in trouble. It goes on and on and on to various groups. Muslims is the groups that Viktor Orban really goes after. He's even said that the other countries in Europe, like the Germanys, the Britons, and the Hollands and others who have accepted a lot of Muslim immigration, that these countries are not even nations anymore. So we're talking about a hard right-wing conservative. You've got Stephen Harper standing beside him, because Stephen Harper is leading this international organization involving conservative parties from all over the world, including the Poilievre conservatives, which used to be known as the Harper conservatives. And Harper is telling Poilievre and all other conservative leaders around the world that they've got to take Orban seriously. They've got to look at him as a role model. They've got to collaborate with him. My question to you, Evan, is why did most media in this country not take that seriously?
So part of the reason is that it was the week after Canada Day, and I suspect that a lot of people are on vacation. The second part of it, which is not an acceptable situation, but I think that actually is the reason for a lot of it. But the second thing is that we have a sort of selective interpretation of when we care about what our politicians and our former politicians get involved with. We don't seem to care that Stephen Harper is doing any of this. There's no real reason. It's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly bad for a conservative party to be palling around with, fascist authoritarians, just as it would be incredibly bad if, John Chrétien was palling around with, or Paul Mulcair or whoever was palling around with, various like anti-NATO, pro-Russia, anti-intervention in Ukraine, helping the Ukrainians, left-wing parties, right? Like, we have to hold our political leadership accountable. And this isn't the first time Harper's met with Viktor Orban. It's not, I don't think, the second time he's done it. But for some reason, we've just decided that Harper and sort of his still plentiful ties to the Canadian Conservative Party, we just decided that for some reason it's not worth covering. And I think that's incredibly dangerous, because we've seen in the US with the abortion stuff, right, where Hillary Clinton was saying that whole 2016 campaign, choice is on the ballot, we need to win the Supreme Court. If not, Roe's going to go. No one cared. Trump wins. He gets the court nominees. Abortion is severely limited in America. For some reason, we don't care about these warning signs until they actually erupt. And part of the reason we don't care is that the media either treats, correct signals of intent as they either don't care, they don't cover it at all, or they just sort of treat it as this, oh, it's fine, it's just what you do, as opposed to it being a legitimately terrifying signal. We don't want Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party to become anything like anything related to Viktor Orban's, the way he governs Hungary, and anybody who says otherwise needs to be roundly and fully condemned, just as I would say to any left winger who, promoted the various left wing cranks, because, cranks exist on all sides of an ideological spectrum, and we need to be willing to call out everybody who fails that.
So, putting morality aside and just talking pure politics, Orban is the most Islamophobic of European leaders. I mean, he's not covert, he's overt, he's not subtle, he's not nuanced. He is in your face about what he thinks of Muslims. He calls them toxic, he calls them poison, he doesn't want them in Hungary, he doesn't want them diluting the white Christian race in Hungary. He says all of these things. As I say, he's not nuanced. Does Poilievre, does the Conservative crew, you mentioned Jenny Byrne earlier, do these people not know that Muslims in Canada, and specifically Muslims in the 905 area code, the suburbs of Toronto, do they think that they won't read? Do they think that they won't read that the elder statesman of the Conservative Party is promoting an Islamophobe? Does Pierre Poilievre not think that this will affect him politically in a part of the country that he absolutely needs?
Clearly not, because this is the same person who voted against a fairly benign denunciation of Islamophobia in the aftermath of Canada's most horrific, explicitly Islamophobic attack, the 2017 Quebec City mosque shooting. And the thing is, it's pretty clear at this point, for reasons passing understanding, that the Conservatives don't care about the suburbs, and they don't care about trying to win minority voters, because they looked at the most winnable seat in Mississauga and said, actually, let's not try and win it in a by-election. Let's not really care about it, and let's not adjust our message when we got creamed in it. Which is part of the weird thing about Poilievre in general. They have this very specific, they don't just want to beat Trudeau, but they also want to win without doing any of they don't want to have to make any of the compromises that you need to beat him. And the whole Conservative theory of the case is that they're going to win because Justin Trudeau is going to end up being a politician, Brian Mulroney-esque politician who has a 9% approval rating on his way out. And I think Paul Wells had a bit at the end of his first book about Stephen Harper, that the list of politicians who had underestimated Stephen Harper was long and growing. I feel like we're going to get to the same. I feel like we're at the same point with Justin Trudeau, because the whole Conservative belief is that, oh no, he's deeply unpopular. He's done for. The end is nigh. Well, what if it's not? What if that might be a sop to your soul to believe it, but you just nearly lost Oxford. You went backwards in Winnipeg. You went backwards in Mississauga Lakeshore. At some point, Conservatives have to reckon with the idea that maybe Justin Trudeau is not as unpopular as they've convinced themselves that he is, and they have no interest in doing that, and they have no interest, therefore, in making any of the compromises that it would take to win, which is to say, sort of actually going on camera to support gay rights, or doing any sort of meaningful ethnic outreach to the 905. It's just this sort of I want to win the way I want to win, and I'm just going to repeat the same banal slogan that no one really understands 42 times.
Just
they want to win, but they want to win their way.
Just for the sake of clarity, Evan, because I'm sure that a lot of people crane their necks just as I did. Did you say the Conservatives don't care about winning in Canada's suburbs? Did you say that?
Yeah, they like they can say whatever they want about wanting to win suburban seats, but their revealed preferences and their revealed actions are that they don't care. They didn't contest a by-election in a seat that the Liberals only won in 2021 by 6 points. They have a policy agenda that is completely suburban. It's not even like suburban apathetic. It's literally repellent to suburban voters. They refuse to ever go on the record and say that they support the childcare plan, which I support as a policy, but in political terms is essentially just a massive subsidy to working class and middle class suburbanites because of how expensive daycare in especially the 905 had gotten, and Greater Vancouver too. Like they can say they want to win the suburbs all they want. They're not trying to. They're not putting a policy agenda out there. They're not sending Poilievre to these places. The weekend before a suburban by-election, they sent Pierre Poilievre to Atlantic Canada to talk about gun rights. I'm sorry. You could have won Mississauga, but you sent Poilievre to go talk about guns the weekend before a by-election? Are you trying to lose? Or are you just really bad at this? Because take your pick.
Well, if it's any wonder why Trudeau looks very confident and Trudeau very, very much intends to fight the next election, is it possible there's a link here? Is it possible that someone has told Trudeau the same thing you've just told us, Evan, that the Conservatives aren't really doing and aren't willing to do what it takes to win in the suburbs? Because if that's the message Trudeau's getting, I'm not saying that he'll be complacent about the next election, but certainly he knows he'll be extremely competitive.
I mean, yeah, like I know, I have decent connections to the PMO and to Liberal staffers these days, and like whenever I talk to them, there's not panic, right? Like when a government's falling apart, and I was a university student and a member of the Ottawa Young Liberals in 2016, 2017. So like dying days of Kathleen Wynne, right? I lived through that government dying in and around a bunch of Ontario Liberals. I know what a dying government looks like. The federal Liberals aren't acting like it. The federal Liberals aren't acting like a government that's just, waiting out the clock and praying for some miracle. They think they can win. They think they're going to win. And part of the reason they think they're going to win is because Poilievre he's doing like good opposition work if the only thing you care about is having a good clip for 505 when power politics and power play go on, right? But in trying to win the day every day, what they're actually doing is making their lives much harder in the long term because they're making tactically correct but strategically stupid choices, right? Criticizing the dental plan, which Poilievre did right after it was announced at the budget. Like, yeah, that's fine. It's a good clip for the day, right? The Liberals are spending too much money. They need to rein in their spending. Just inflation, whatever. Okay, cool. The next election is going to be fought, some time from now. Interest rates we're going to be done with the interest rate rises. Inflation's going to have a 2 or a 1 in front of it by that point. And the economy is going to be, coming up. So all of this political capital that you've built up around this idea that, just inflation and, they spent too much money, even parking the like legitimacy of that argument, it's not going to be an effective argument by the time you get to the next election because the Liberals, by doing the deal with the NDP, control the next election timing. And obviously they're going to go to the next election at a time of their choosing, which is to say when the economy is better. But Poilievre is so focused on winning the day. He's so focused on winning Twitter. He's so focused on winning the 5 o'clock political shows that they're making the wrong decision. They're playing politics instead of building a policy. And they can say they want to win the suburbs all they want, they're not acting like it. And if you're not going to win a single seat in Brampton, you're not going to win a single seat in Mississauga, you know, then you have to run the table everywhere else. You have to straight up run the table through everything. You have to knock off long-term incumbents everywhere. And the thing is, as anyone who's ever played poker, like, you might have the hand, but you might be a 70-30 favorite or an 80-20 favorite to win any poker hand individually. You're not going to win 12 of those. Even if you're supposed to, you're going to lose something. Somebody's going to get a card on the river. Some incumbent's going to hold on. And the problem is, Poilievre's only out is to win a bunch of seats that no Conservatives ever won, or to, like, break through in Quebec. But his polls in Quebec are terrible. They've looked at him and gone, nope, I have no interest in that. And the Liberals, fundamentally, like, you're from Quebec, you know it pretty well. Both my parents are from the province, and I pay enough attention to it. The thing is, Quebec can swing pretty wildly at any given time, and if in 2 years, Francois Legault's a little bit more unpopular, and the sort of idea of the Bloc as the defenders of Legault and the defenders of Quebec against Ottawa is a little less salient. Would anybody be surprised if the Bloc fell back a little bit and the Liberals won another 6-8 seats?
Well, I can tell you this: the reason the Conservatives go nowhere in Quebec is because of the Bloc Québécois. And when the Bloc Québécois was formed, that was the message to Brian Mulroney to head for the fire exit. So the Bloc Québécois blocks movement in Quebec. If Poilievre doesn't care about the suburbs of Toronto because he thinks that he can compensate by getting Quebec, that's a really, really bad bet. Evan Scrimshaw, I just want to let people know that you're all over Twitter. You've got a tremendous Substack, which I read every week assiduously, and you've also got a website and a podcast. I hope you'll agree to come back, because I really loved having you, and I learn from you all the time, and I learned from you a little more tonight. This is the first time that I've actually imbibed the fact that the Conservatives don't care to do what it takes to win the suburbs. That's a significant piece of news commentary. Evan, thank you so much for this.
Glad to do this, and we'll come on as often as you want to ask me.
Evan Scrimshaw is in Ottawa. My name is Charles Adler. Thank you for subscribing, and thank you for tuning in this particular podcast. If you can tell your friends and neighbors, they can pick up the Charles Adler Show podcast anywhere they get their podcasts: Spotify, Google, Apple, you name it. I'm Charles Adler. That's the truth. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it's still the truth. Bye-bye.
Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. Twice a week in the Winnipeg Free Press. And every day at criermedia.co.